The fluorescent hum of Meridian Enterprises headquarters was a constant, low thrum against Clara Davies's perpetual exhaustion. Another Tuesday, another maze of cubicles where she, a tiny cog, felt acutely out of place. She moved through the gleaming halls, a stack of folders clutched to her chest, her mind already on the evening ahead. An administrative job supporting her family, night classes for a business degree, and the ever-present weight of expectations. She often felt like an imposter, a small-town girl trying to navigate a world of titans. "Clara!" Diane's sharp voice cut through the drone. "Mr. Thorne needs these reports by 10. Don't be late." Clara nodded, a practiced, tired smile on her face. "Right away, Diane." She wished she had time to jot down a thought or two, a fleeting observation about the corporate jungle in her worn burgundy diary. That small book was her only true confidant, a safe space for the feelings she couldn't express. Reaching her cubicle, Clara set down the reports and instinctively reached for her oversized tote bag, her fingers searching for the familiar leather-bound comfort of her diary. Her breath hitched. It wasn't there. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She emptied the bag onto her desk, papers, pens, and a half-eaten granola bar scattering across the laminate. No, no, no! Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The burgundy diary, a gift from her late father, was gone. Panic, sharp and icy, clawed its way up her throat. It wasn't just a journal, it was a record of her most candid, unfiltered thoughts. Thoughts about Meridian's cutthroat culture, the questionable ethics she sometimes glimpsed, and, most damningly, her intensely personal, entirely inappropriate observations about the company's enigmatic CEO, Victor Thorne. If anyone found it, if anyone read it, her carefully constructed life would shatter. Clara was still staring at the chaotic mess on her desk, her hands trembling, when a shadow fell over her cubicle. "Everything all right, Clara?" Leo Kim, the marketing director, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, looked genuinely concerned. Clara felt a wave of relief at the sight of a friendly face, but the panic remained. My diary," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's gone." Leo's brow furrowed. "That little burgundy one? Oh no, when did you last see it?" Clara squeezed her eyes shut, trying to rewind the day. "Yesterday, I think. I was in the main conference room for the budget review. I had it then, I'm sure." A glimmer of hope, quickly overshadowed by a fresh wave of worry. The main conference room, usually locked tight, especially after hours. The rest of the morning blurred into a desperate, covert search. Clara navigated the bustling office, performing her administrative duties with a forced calm, her eyes darting, always searching. She checked the break room, the small meeting rooms, even the empty cubicle next to hers. Every time she rounded a corner, her gaze scanned the floor, the desks, the shelves. Each failed attempt was a fresh stab of dread. The diary contained not just embarrassing crushes, but potentially damaging observations about corporate strategies and key players. Her anxiety mounted, a relentless hum beneath her professional facade. No burgundy cover, no familiar weight. Nothing. Lunchtime found Clara slumped against the lost and found cabinet, scanning its meager contents with a despairing sigh. "Nothing," she mumbled as Leo approached, a half-eaten sandwich in hand. "It's just gone. Someone must have picked it up." Leo chewed thoughtfully. "The main conference room, you said. It's usually locked, but the cleaning crew might have found it. Or, well, sometimes Victor Thorne uses it for private calls after everyone's left. He's in there now, actually. I saw him go in." Clara's stomach dropped. Victor Thorne. The intimidating CEO. The thought of him, his sharp, analytical mind even glancing at her private thoughts, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. A direct path to the diary, but guarded by a lion. Leo, sensing her renewed anxiety, quickly handed Clara a stack of thick folders. "Here, take these to Mr. Thorne. Urgent reports from legal. It'll give you an excuse to get in there." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. This was it. The moment of truth. She approached the imposing conference room door, her steps hesitant. It was ajar, a sliver of light escaping the crack. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, She pushed it open just enough to peer inside, and there he was. Victor Thorne, a solitary, powerful figure, silhouetted against the panoramic city view, his back to her, deep in thought. Her stomach churned. This wasn't just about retrieving a diary. It was about confronting her deepest fears, her most secret vulnerabilities. Clara cleared her throat, her voice a reedy whisper. "Mr. Thorne?" "Reports from legal." Victor turned, his gaze as sharp and unwavering as she always imagined. He took the folders, his fingers brushing hers, sending an unexpected jolt through her. She mumbled a quick "thank you" and turned to leave, her mission a failure. But then, just as she reached the door, her eyes snagged on a splash of familiar color on the edge of his massive mahogany table, partially obscured by a stack of papers, unmistakably burgundy. Her diary. Her heart seized. It was right there, on Victor Thorne's desk. Her gaze must have lingered, because his voice, low and precise, cut through the sudden, deafening silence in the room. "Is there something else, Miss Davies?" His eyes, dark and piercing, held hers, and Clara felt a cold dread spread through her veins. He knew. He absolutely knew. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding attention. She practically collided with Leo Kim in the hallway, her face flushed, eyes wide with terror. "He has it, Leo. Victor Thorne has my diary," she whispered, the words barely audible over the office din. Leo's friendly smile vanished, replaced by a look of grave concern. "Your diary? The burgundy one?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, a frantic gesture. "It's worse than I thought. It's not just my personal thoughts, Leo. It has everything. My observations about Victor's management style, how he pushes junior staff, my doubts about the Westridge deal, the financial discrepancies I noticed." She trailed off, then choked out the most devastating secret of all. And it has my feelings. My completely inappropriate, utterly unprofessional feelings for him. The last line I wrote, "Leo, it's a confession." She felt a wave of hot shame wash over her. Every candid, ill-advised thought, every romantic fantasy, now lay exposed. Leo's eyes widened further. "Clara, this is really bad. You have to get it back. Now." His urgency only fueled her rising panic. The clock on her desktop monitor seemed to mock her, each tick a hammer blow. Clara watched Victor Thorne's office door with a desperate intensity, waiting for him to leave. 5 o'clock. 5:15. Finally, the CEO's imposing figure emerged, his expression unreadable as he strode towards the elevators. The moment his silhouette disappeared, Clara was on her feet, heart thumping like a trapped bird. She moved with furtive haste, slipping into his office. The rich scent of his cologne, the immaculate order of his workspace, it all felt like a violation as she searched. Her gaze darted to the large mahogany desk, the very spot where she'd seen the burgundy cover. It wasn't there. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She scanned the credenza, the side table, even the floor around the chair, her hands trembling. Nothing. It was gone. He must have taken it. He must have read it. A profound sense of dread settled in her stomach. A sudden, chilling draft swept through the office, and Clara whirled around. Victor Thorne stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, casting a long shadow. In his hand, clutched casually between thumb and forefinger, was her burgundy diary. Her breath hitched. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. His eyes, usually cool and sharp, bore into hers, holding an intensity she'd never seen. He took a slow step into the room, then another, the diary swinging slightly. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, his voice, low and resonant, cut through the air, each word a precise, deliberate incision. "I know he's a CEO, powerful and untouchable, but sometimes, when he looks at me, I can't help but wish he saw something more. I wish he saw me, Clara Davies, not just his assistant. And God help me, I think I'm falling in love with him." The last line. He'd read the last line. Clara's face burned, her stomach twisted into knots of humiliation and terror. He held the diary out, offering it to her. As she reached for it, her fingers brushing his, she felt a subtle tremor in his hand. For a fleeting second, she saw it, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in his eyes before it vanished, replaced by his usual impenetrable gaze. The diary was back in her trembling hands, a hot, heavy stone. Clara clutched it, unable to meet Victor's gaze, unable to process the whirlwind of emotions surging through her. What did that look mean? What did any of this mean? He hadn't fired her. He hadn't yelled. He had simply quoted her deepest, most embarrassing secret. Victor cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the office. His voice, though still controlled, carried a barely perceptible tremor. "Clara," he said, using her first name, a jarring intimacy after the revelation. "Be in my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning." He paused, his gaze unblinking. "We have much to discuss." The words hung in the air, a loaded invitation, a veiled threat. Clara could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She mumbled a hasty, barely coherent goodbye, clutching the diary to her chest as she practically fled his office. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate, whatever it might be. She walked through the darkening office, utterly unsure if she was about to face termination, humiliation, or something far more bewildering. The harsh glow of the bedside lamp did little to comfort Clara. Her tiny apartment, usually a haven of quiet solitude, felt like a cage as the hours of the night dragged on. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor Thorne's face, felt the weight of her diary in her hands, and heard his voice, cool and precise, quoting her most vulnerable confession. "I think I might be falling in love with you." She sat up, pulling the burgundy notebook from beneath her pillow. Its familiar cover, once a source of comfort, now felt like a brand. She flipped through the pages, her gaze skittering over her scrawled thoughts, the raw, unfiltered emotion she'd poured onto the paper. Each observation about Meridian Enterprises, about its corporate culture, about the Westridge deal, felt like a reckless act of insubordination. But worse, far worse, were the entries about him. The way his dark eyes held an unexpected depth, the surprising kindness she'd occasionally glimpsed, the sheer, undeniable magnetism that had drawn her in despite herself. A hot flush crept up her neck. How could she have been so foolish, so utterly transparent? She buried her face in her hands, a whispered, "No, no, no," escaping her lips. Tomorrow she would face the music, and it would be a symphony of her own undoing. Morning arrived with a cruel and different sun. Clara moved through her apartment like a ghost, the smell of burnt toast from her roommate Zoe, doing little to rouse her appetite. She dressed in her most professional, albeit slightly worn, suit, attempting to project an air of competence she felt utterly devoid of. "You look like you're going to a funeral," Zoe commented, handing her a lukewarm mug of instant coffee. Her usually cheerful face was etched with concern. "Still convinced you're getting the boot?" Clara managed a humorless smile. "Boot, axe, guillotine, take your pick. He knows everything, Zoe. Every single misguided thought I've ever had about him. About the company, about everything." She clutched the coffee mug, the ceramic warm against her trembling hands. "I practically wrote a manifesto on his desk, then signed it with a love letter." Zoe wrapped an arm around her. "Hey, it's Victor Thorne. Maybe he'll be impressed by your candor, or your passion." She tried for optimism, but her eyes held a shared dread. Clara shook her head, a knot tightening in her stomach. "He's the CEO, not a matchmaker. He's probably just deciding whether to fire me quietly or make an example of me for insubordination. My career is over before it even began." The thought was a cold, hard stone in her chest. She took a deep breath, forcing a semblance of composure. Whatever was coming, she had to face it. The commute to Meridian was a blur of nervous energy. Clara arrived ridiculously early, the building still quiet, the vast lobby gleaming under the artificial light. Each step echoed her pounding heart as she made her way to the executive elevators. This was it, the moment of reckoning. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt impossibly long, the ascent slow and deliberate, like a condemned woman's last journey. She stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. Pale, resolute, a faint tremor in her lips. She mentally rehearsed her lines, discarded them, then started over. Apologize. Be professional. State your case. No, don't state your case, just accept your fate with dignity. But what was her case? That she was an idiot who wrote down her every thought and feeling? The doors finally chimed open, revealing the hushed, carpeted expanse of the executive floor. The air felt thinner here, charged with an invisible power. With each step towards Victor Thorne's office, her resolve wavered, then solidified. She wouldn't crumble. Not yet. Clara's hand hovered over the polished oak door to Victor Thorne's office, a silent prayer escaping her lips. She took a fortifying breath and pushed it open. The office was vast, as always, but something was different. Victor wasn't behind his imposing mahogany desk, the usual barrier between him and the rest of the world. Instead, he stood by the panoramic window silhouetted against the morning city skyline, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands. The light softened the sharp angles of his profile, making him seem less formidable. He turned as she entered, his gaze, though still intense, held none of the harsh judgment she'd anticipated. "Clara," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, lacking the frigid edge she expected. He gestured towards a more informal seating area. 2 plush leather armchairs facing each other beside a low, minimalist table. "Please, sit." Clara hesitated, her mind scrambling to reconcile this Victor with the one she'd imagined. This wasn't the fiery executioner she'd braced herself for. This was unexpected. She moved cautiously, taking the seat he indicated, her posture rigid. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Victor took the opposite chair, setting his mug down with a soft click. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on hers, an expression of genuine concern softening his features. "Clara," he began, his voice low and steady, "I want to start by saying, I am truly sorry." Clara blinked, utterly stunned. Her carefully constructed defenses, ready for a barrage of accusations, crumbled. "An apology? From him?" he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Reading your personal diary was an inexcusable breach of privacy. There is no justification for it, and I deeply regret having done so." A faint line appeared between his brows, a sign of genuine discomfort. "It was wrong, and I offer you my sincere apologies." The air left Clara's lungs in a silent whoosh. She had prepared for anger, for dismissal, for humiliation. Not for this. The sincerity in his voice, the directness of his gaze, chipped away at her fear, replacing it with a strange mix of shock and a nascent, fragile respect. Her throat felt tight. I understand," she managed, the words barely a whisper. Her defenses, which had been so formidable, were momentarily gone, leaving her feeling exposed, but also, strangely, a little lighter. She hadn't realized how much she dreaded this moment until the anticipated blow hadn't landed. Victor nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Thank you for that," he said quietly. He then leaned back, his posture still relaxed, but his gaze sharpened, becoming more analytical. "However, what I read, it was profound, Clara. Particularly your observations about me. How did you, a junior administrative assistant, see things that others, people who have known me for years, fail to perceive?" Clara felt a fresh wave of embarrassment. The diary, again. She shifted uncomfortably, but his gaze was not accusatory, only genuinely curious. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, pushing past the initial flush. I don't know exactly," she admitted, her voice gaining a little strength. I try to look for the humanity in people, I suppose, to read between the lines, beyond the corporate persona. Everyone has layers, Mr. Thorne, even you." She risked a small, uncertain smile. "Especially you." He watched her intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. "The humanity in people," he repeated almost to himself. "An interesting perspective, one that seems to have served you well." His eyes held a new depth, a hint of curiosity that went beyond the professional. It was as if he was genuinely trying to understand her, and perhaps himself, through her eyes. Victor's gaze shifted, becoming more focused, more serious. "Beyond your personal observations, your diary also contains some rather astute professional insights. Specifically, regarding the Westridge deal. Clara's stomach dropped. The brief reprieve from fear was over. This was it, the corporate hammer. "Mr. Thorne, I deeply apologize for overstepping," she stammered, her voice shrinking. "I know my place, and my opinions on such matters are completely out of line. I was just processing things. It wasn't meant for anyone else to see." She braced herself, shoulders tensing, ready for the rebuke, the lecture on corporate hierarchy, the inevitable dismissal. The brief connection they'd shared seemed to evaporate, replaced by the familiar chasm of their professional roles. She'd been foolish to think an apology meant a free pass. Victor held up a hand, stopping her apology mid-sentence. "Clara," he said, a surprising note of firmness in his voice. "You were right." Clara froze, her mouth slightly agape. "Right?" He reached for a slim, unmarked folder on the low table between them, sliding it across to her. "Your observations on Westridge's financials, their questionable environmental practices, and their aggressive acquisition history, they mirrored my own concerns. Concerns the board, in their eagerness for a quick profit, has largely dismissed." Clara cautiously opened the file. Inside were dense reports, charts, and legal documents, all outlining the very issues she had merely intuited and scribbled down in her diary. Her eyes widened as she scanned the damning evidence. "But why is the board pushing for it then?" she asked, looking up, a dawning understanding replacing her apprehension. "Because the numbers look good on paper, and some board members have vested interests," Victor replied, his voice hardening slightly. "They see opportunity. I see risk. Unethical practices, potential legal liabilities, damage to Meridian's reputation. I've been looking for a way to stop it, to get them to see beyond the immediate gains." "Your diary." It articulated these concerns with a clarity I hadn't yet achieved. Clara slowly closed the confidential file, her mind reeling. The CEO of Meridian Enterprises was sharing classified information with her? And not only that, he was validating her intuition, her gut feelings, over the analytical reports of his own senior staff. "But why are you telling me this, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of awe and disbelief. Victor leaned forward again, his intense gaze locking onto hers. "Because, Clara, your observations, your intuition, your ability to see beneath surfaces, as you put it, are invaluable. When everyone else, including myself at times, was blinded by the prospect of a lucrative deal, you saw the rot beneath. You identified subtle cues, discrepancies that others, with all their experience and data, simply missed." He paused, a hint of something akin to admiration in his eyes. "That kind of insight cannot be taught, and it is precisely what Meridian needs right now, what SICE need right now." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. To be seen, truly seen, not just as an assistant, but as someone whose perspective held genuine value, it was a revelation. A bond, forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, began to solidify between them. Victor's gaze softened slightly, shifting back to a more personal intensity. "And those other observations, Clara," he said, his voice dropping. "The ones about me. How I build walls, how I isolate myself. How did you see past all of that?" Clara felt the familiar blush creep up her neck, but this time, it was mingled with a strange sense of empathy. He wasn't accusing her. He was genuinely asking. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, her voice a little shaky. "But I recognized it. The way you hold yourself, the distance you keep. It's a defense mechanism, isn't it? A way to protect yourself from getting hurt." She swallowed, suddenly feeling incredibly vulnerable herself. "I know what it's like to build those walls. To try and keep the world out, after something you can't recover from." Clara looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "My father died when I was young," she confessed, the words tasting bittersweet on her tongue. "He was everything. And when he was gone, it felt like my world ended. I learned very quickly that if you don't let people in too close, they can't leave you. They can't hurt you." She looked up, meeting Victor's gaze, which had softened to an almost raw empathy. "The diary. It was his last gift to me. It's where I put everything I couldn't say out loud. All the feelings, all the observations. Losing it was like losing a piece of him, a piece of myself, all over again." A profound silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Victor's expression was unreadable, but Clara saw a flicker of something raw, something deeply human in his eyes. It was a shared moment of vulnerability, of acknowledging the scars that shaped them. The diary, once a source of her greatest humiliation, had become a bridge. Just then, Victor's phone buzzed on the table, a jarring intrusion that yanked them back to the present. He glanced at the screen, a grim line forming on his lips. "The board meeting," he murmured, his eyes still on Clara, but his mind clearly shifting gears. 10 minutes. Victor pushed himself to his feet, the gravity of the upcoming meeting evident in his posture. "They're expecting me to rubber stamp the Westridge acquisition," he said, pacing a short distance before turning back to Clara. "They're going to push hard. They'll cite the projected profits, the market share. They won't listen to anything that isn't hard numbers or direct, undeniable risk." He stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. "So, Clara Davies, the woman who sees beneath surfaces, the woman who understands the hidden currents. How do I stop them?" Clara was taken aback. He was asking summon her for strategic advice on a multi-million-dollar deal? Her mind, which had been reeling with personal revelations moments before, snapped into sharp focus. This wasn't about her feelings now. It was about Meridian's future. It was about right and wrong. "You don't fight them on ethics, not directly," she said, finding her voice. "You fight them on what they understand best, risk. You frame Westridge not as unethical, but as a liability, a financial and reputational risk that will cost them far more than any short-term gain." She met his gaze, a newfound confidence blooming within her. "Appeal to their pragmatism, not their conscience." Victor listened intently, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Risk management," he said, a note of approval in his voice. "Precisely. The language they understand." He nodded, then looked at her, his dark eyes sparkling with a challenge and something more. "Excellent, Clara. Then I suppose you'll need to be there." Clara blinked. "There? Mr. Thorne, I'm an administrative assistant. I can't just—" "You're not going as an administrative assistant," he interrupted, his voice firm, unwavering. "You're coming as my strategic advisor on the Westridge acquisition. The person who uncovered the most critical insights into its true nature." He paused, his gaze daring her to object. "I need you there, Clara, to present your findings, to articulate the risks, to ensure they listen." Clara's jaw dropped. "Strategic advisor? To the board meeting?" It was an unprecedented invitation, a seismic shift in her career, a terrifying, exhilarating leap into the unknown. Disbelief warred with a surge of adrenaline. This was real. This was happening. Victor watched her, a slight, confident smile playing on his lips. "And one more thing, Clara," he added, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "Given the nature of our unique collaboration and the discussions we've had, I think it's time we dropped the formalities. May I call you Clara?" A warmth spread through her, chasing away the last vestiges of fear. This wasn't just a professional appointment. It was a personal acknowledgement, a deepening of the unexpected bond between them. "Only if I can call you Alexander," she replied, her own smile shy but genuine. Alexander. It felt right, intimate. He inclined his head, his smile widening slightly. "Alexander it is." He rose, extending a hand to her. "Now, Clara, shall we go win this battle?" Clara took his hand, the contact brief but firm, a jolt of connection passing between them. The gravity of the upcoming board meeting still loomed, but now, a sense of shared purpose, a thrilling partnership, eclipsed her dread. She stood taller, a quiet fire ignited within her. "Yes, Alexander," she said, her voice steady, determined. "We shall." She followed him out of the office, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The polished oak doors of the Meridian Enterprises boardroom loomed, impossibly tall, impossibly heavy. Clara followed Alexander, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The air inside felt thick, laden with the weight of expectation and the silent judgment of the dozen or so faces already seated around the colossal table. These were the pillars of Meridian, the architects of its destiny. And she, Clara Davies, an administrative assistant, was acutely, painfully aware of how out of place she was. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, mimicking Alexander's confident stride, but she could feel their eyes on her, curious, skeptical, some outright dismissive. Whispers, soft as the rustle of silk, followed her like a shadow. She was an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in their carefully controlled equation. Taking the seat Alexander indicated, next to him, Clara felt the plush leather swallow her, yet her posture remained rigid, a fragile shield against the scrutiny. This was it. The Shark Tank. Alexander took his place at the head of the table, his presence immediately commanding the room. He cleared his throat, and the last of the murmurs died. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice calm, authoritative. "As you know, we're here to discuss the proposed Westridge acquisition. Before we dive into the financials, I'd like to introduce Clara Davies, who has been assisting me closely on this project." A collective ripple went through the room. Clara felt a prickle of heat rise in her cheeks. Richard Sterling, Meridian's CFO, a man with a perpetually smooth, almost oily smile, leaned forward. "Assisting, Victor?" he questioned, his tone dripping with polite skepticism. "While I'm sure Ms. Davies is a capable assistant, I'm unclear on her role in a board-level strategic discussion." His eyes, though fixed on Victor, flicked to Clara with a dismissive glint. Clara stiffened, her hands clenching under the table. She caught Leo Kim's eye across the table. The marketing director offered a quick, encouraging smile, a silent anchor in the turbulent waters. Eleanor Vance, Meridian's head of legal, a woman whose sharp gaze could dissect a legal brief in seconds, remained silent, but her eyes, cold and analytical, never left Clara. The battle lines were drawn. Alexander ignored Richard's jab. "Clara has provided invaluable insights into the Westridge deal. Her perspective has been unique. Clara, if you would, please share your findings regarding the financial reports." Clara's heart pounded a furious rhythm against her ribs, threatening to burst free. Every eye in the room was on her now. She took a slow, deep breath, anchoring herself. This wasn't about her, it was about the truth. She pushed down the fear, finding a surprising wellspring of determination. Her voice, though a little shaky at first, steadied as she spoke. "Thank you, Alexander. I've been reviewing Westridge's quarterly and annual reports, specifically focusing on their liabilities and asset valuations over the past 3 years." She projected the first slide onto the large screen, a meticulously prepared chart highlighting anomalies. "What I've identified," she continued, pointing to a specific data point, "are several significant discrepancies in their reported revenue streams and a concerning pattern of underreporting operational costs. For instance, in Q3 of last year, there's a 15% variance between their public filings and what their internal, unaudited reports suggest for a specific subsidiary." She spoke with a clarity that belied her internal turmoil, presenting the data points and their implications, her initial nervousness slowly giving way to the quiet confidence of someone who knew their facts. A few board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to a flicker of interest. But Eleanor Vance was not among them. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and precise. "Miss Davies," she began, her tone laced with a barely concealed condescension, "while your observations are noted, may I remind the board that you are an administrative assistant? With all due respect, what qualifications do you possess to be making such detailed financial assessments? Are you a certified auditor? Do you have an MBA?" The questions hung in the air, designed to diminish, to put Clara firmly back in her place. Clara felt a hot flush creep up her neck, a familiar sting of being underestimated. The old Clara would have crumbled, stammered an apology, but the new Clara, forged in the crucible of her diary's exposure and Alexander's trust, felt a surge of defiance. She met Eleanor's challenging gaze, refusing to look away. A quick, almost imperceptible nod from Alexander gave her the strength she needed. She would not back down. Clara took another steadying breath. "Ms. Vance," she replied, her voice calm but firm, My qualifications are irrelevant to the data itself. The numbers speak for themselves. While I am not a certified auditor, I have a keen eye for detail and a foundational understanding of financial reporting. More importantly, these discrepancies were visible enough to raise red flags for someone with my level of access. She paused, letting that sink in. Then she reached for a stack of folders. Alexander provided me with access to internal reports and analyses, which corroborated my initial concerns. I've prepared copies of his confidential report, detailing these irregularities and suggesting they warrant a far deeper forensic investigation before any acquisition proceeds. She distributed the folders, the rustle of papers filling the sudden silence. Meridian Enterprises prides itself on integrity, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. Associating with a company that potentially operates with such financial opacity poses significant long-term risks, not just financially, but to our reputation. The board members, now holding the damning evidence, began to pore over the pages, their expressions shifting from skepticism to genuine concern, some even shock. Alexander watched her, a proud glint in his eyes. The boardroom buzzed with an intensity Clara had never witnessed. For nearly 2 hours, the discussion raged. Board members, initially resistant, now grappled with the undeniable evidence Clara had presented, bolstered by Alexander's confidential report. She found herself repeatedly drawn into the conversation, her concise answers and sharp insights cutting through the corporate jargon. Eleanor Vance, initially so dismissive, now listened intently, occasionally asking Clara clarifying questions that she answered with a newfound confidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the vote was called. One by one, hands went up, unanimous. The Westridge acquisition was halted, pending a complete independent audit. A collective sigh of relief, subtle but palpable, swept through the room. Clara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, quickly followed by exhilarating triumph. She had done it. She had stood her ground, and she had won. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Richard Sterling. His face was a mask of professional composure, but his jaw was tight, his eyes burning with an irritation he barely managed to conceal. His frustration was a small, satisfying victory in itself. As the board members slowly dispersed, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Richard Sterling approached Clara, a thin, almost forced smile on his lips. "Miss Davies," he said, his voice smooth but lacking genuine warmth. "Remarkable, truly. An administrative assistant uncovering what our entire finance team overlooked. Very impressive." It was a backhanded compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. Clara merely offered a polite, non-committal smile in return. Eleanor Vance paused beside her, her gaze thoughtful. "You have a unique eye, Miss Davies," she said, a hint of something unreadable in her tone before she nodded and moved on. It wasn't an apology, but it was a reevaluation. Once they were alone, Alexander turned to Clara, a genuine, warm smile gracing his lips. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, "you were magnificent. You held your own, you presented the facts clearly, and you swayed them." He reached out, his hand briefly, gently touching her arm. "I knew I could trust your judgment. More than that, I knew I could trust you." The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes, sent a shiver down Clara's spine. It was a victory, not just for Meridian, but for them. Their shared moment of triumph was short-lived. Alexander's phone buzzed, pulling him from the quiet intimacy. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. "Finch," he muttered, referring to Maxwell Finch, Westridge's CEO. "He wants an emergency meeting. Says he's bringing his entire executive team. Threatening legal action." Clara's mind immediately began connecting the dots. "They're worried," she stated, her analytical instincts kicking in. "They know their deal is on thin ice, and they're trying to salvage it or intimidate us into proceeding." Alexander looked at her, his expression grim but resolute. "Precisely. And I want you there, Clara. This isn't just about financial discrepancies anymore. This is a confrontation. I need your insights, your perspective, the woman who sees beneath surfaces." His insistence on her presence solidified her new, unofficial role. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. Weeks blurred into a whirlwind. Clara's days were no longer spent filing or scheduling. Her desk, once cluttered with admin tasks, now held confidential reports, complex spreadsheets, and detailed analyses. She was no longer an assistant. She was Alexander Thorne's special advisor, her involvement in strategic decisions increasing exponentially. She sat in meetings, contributed to discussions, and her opinions were sought, valued. It was everything she had secretly dreamed of. But with this meteoric rise came a new set of challenges. Not everyone approved. The whispers, once faint, grew louder, more pointed. She felt the chill of judgmental glances as she walked through the office. "Favoritism," she heard one colleague murmur, sleeping her way to the top. Another sneered. It was a bitter taste in her mouth. She tried to ignore it, to focus on the work, on the trust Alexander had placed in her. But the insidious undercurrent of corporate politics, of jealousy and prejudice, was a constant, unsettling presence. It was a reminder that even success had its price. One evening, Clara was working late, poring over a new set of data related to Westridge's partnerships, when Leo Kim appeared in her cubicle doorway. His usual cheerful demeanor was replaced with a serious, almost somber expression. "Clara, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up, a knot forming in her stomach. "Everything all right, Leo?" He sat on the edge of her desk, his gaze scanning the deserted office. "Look, I'm glad you're doing so well, truly. You deserve it. But you need to be careful with Alexander." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Leo hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He has a reputation, especially when it comes to talented women. There was an analyst a few years back, Isabel Flores. Brilliant woman. Alexander took her under his wing, just like you. She rose fast, became indispensable to him. Then, things ended badly." He trailed off, his eyes holding a silent, ominous warning. Clara's unease deepened. "What happened to Isabel?" she pressed, but Leo just shook his head. "She just disappeared from Meridian. No one really talks about it. Just be careful, Clara. Don't get too close." His words, hanging in the quiet office, cast a sudden, chilling shadow over Clara's growing trust in Alexander. Later that evening, the echo of Leo's warning still reverberating in her mind, Clara was walking past Alexander's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she heard voices, sharp and angry. Richard Sterling's voice, raised in a rare display of open hostility, cut through the quiet. "This is getting out of hand, Victor. Your infatuation with an unqualified assistant is jeopardizing everything. The board is talking. This is another Isabel situation, isn't it?" Clara froze, her hand halfway to the door. Her blood ran cold. Not another Isabel situation. The words were a physical blow. Alexander's voice, usually so controlled, was now a low, furious growl. "Don't you dare compare Clara to that. She is nothing like Isabel, and her talent is undeniable. She has saved this company from a disastrous deal." "Oh, she's talented, all right," Richard sneered, his tone dripping with venom. "Just like Isabel was. And Rebecca. And Allison. There's a pattern, Victor. A very inconvenient pattern for a CEO. The board won't tolerate it. You protect her, you risk your own position." Clara's world tilted. Naka, Rebecca. Allison. The names felt like knives twisting in her gut. She wasn't just another talented woman. She was part of an asterisk pattern. A sense of profound shock, then a searing pain, washed over her. The trust she had so carefully built, the respect she believed she had earned, felt like it was crumbling into dust. Alexander's fierce defense, meant to protect her, only amplified the sting of Richard's accusation. Was she truly just another casualty in his corporate game? Richard's voice, now calmer but even more menacing, continued. "The board has made a decision, Victor. A proactive one. To mitigate any further complications, we're offering Ms. Davies a senior strategic advisor position in our Singapore office." Clara gasped, stifling the sound with her hand. "Like Singapore, it wasn't an offer. It was an exile, a removal, a banishment." Alexander's voice was strained, thick, with barely suppressed fury. "You can't be serious. This is absurd. She's indispensable here, now more than ever." "It's already been approved," Richard countered, his voice chillingly triumphant. "A generous package, a new opportunity. And it removes the perceived conflict of interest. Make this happen, Victor, or your leadership will be called into question. Again." Clara felt a profound devastation. It was a trap, a political maneuver, and Alexander, despite his anger, seemed powerless to stop it. The man who had championed her, trusted her, now seemed to be delivering her to the wolves. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the imposing office door. All the warmth, all the connection, all the shared vulnerability they had built, felt like a cruel deception. She had been so naive, so utterly painfully naive. She backed away silently, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. Clara arrived at Meridian before dawn, fueled by a sleepless night and a burning need for answers. She intended to confront Alexander, to demand the truth, to understand how the man who had seen her, truly seen her, could allow this to happen. His office door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the silent executive corridor. She pushed it open, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The office was empty, Alexander clearly not yet in. But on his pristine mahogany desk, centered with an almost deliberate cruelty, lay a crisp, white envelope. Her name, Clara Davies, was typed neatly on the front. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the thick paper. Inside, a formal offer letter outlined the terms of her new senior strategic advisor position. In Singapore. Effective immediately. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a reality. A cold, stark confirmation of her worst fears. The official document, so impersonal, felt like a final, definitive betrayal. Just as the reality of the letter settled over her like a shroud, Eleanor Vance appeared in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically soft, almost sympathetic. "Ms. Davies," she began, stepping into the office. "I trust you've seen the offer." Clara could only nod, a choked sound catching in her throat. Eleanor sighed, her gaze softening slightly. "I know this feels harsh. It is. But sometimes, in this environment, it's a lifeboat. A way to avoid worse. You see, Victor has a pattern, a very distinct one." Clara looked up, her eyes wide, desperate for an explanation, however painful. "He finds bright, talented young women," Eleanor continued, her voice devoid of malice, simply stating facts. "He sees their potential, champions them, brings them into his inner circle. And then, when their proximity to him or their rapid rise creates complications, he moves them. For their own good, he claims. To protect them from the board's scrutiny. There was Isabel, yes, but also Rebecca. And Allison before her. All incredibly capable, all elevated, and all eventually relocated. Disappeared from Meridian, effectively. Clara felt the last vestiges of her hope crumble. The names. The pattern. Eleanor's calm, factual explanation. It wasn't malice, perhaps, but it was manipulation. She wasn't an exception. She was just the latest in a line of carefully managed situations. The realization was devastating. "So, I was just another one?" Clara whispered, her voice cracking, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. "Another? Complication? To be? Relocated?" The cold, corporate setting suddenly felt like an iron cage, trapping her in a cycle she hadn't even known existed. The betrayal was complete, and the hurt was profound. Victor Thorne arrived in his office, a subtle tension in his shoulders Clara hadn't noticed before. His usual controlled composure slightly frayed. But Clara was beyond noticing subtleties. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the rage and hurt that had festered all night. She clutched the Singapore offer letter in her hand, the crisp paper a stark contrast to her trembling fingers. "Victor," she began, her voice a dangerous whisper. "We need to talk about this." She thrust the letter at him, then let the names spill out, each one a fresh stab of pain. "Isabel, Rebecca, Allison. Is this what you do? Build them up, then ship them off when they get too close? When they start to feel something?" Her voice cracked on the last words, tears blurring her vision. But she refused to break. She searched his face, desperate for an explanation, for a denial, for anything that could mend the chasm that had opened between them. Victor recoiled as if struck, his own face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, pain, and a profound sadness. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He seemed trapped, caught in a silent struggle, unable to articulate the truth she so desperately needed. Before Victor could find his voice, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile moment. His assistant's voice, tight with urgency, cut through the air. "Mr. Thorne, Maxwell Finch, and the Westridge legal team are here. They're threatening immediate legal action for breach of contract. They insist on seeing you now." Victor's gaze flickered between Clara's tear-filled eyes and the closed door. The weight of the corporate crisis pulled him away. "Clara, we will discuss this later. I promise." He turned, his back to her, leaving her with a bitter taste in her mouth. "Later might be too late," Clara whispered, but he was already moving. He had chosen, and it wasn't her. She turned and walked out, the unanswered questions twisting like knives in her gut, leaving her feeling utterly powerless. As Clara stormed away from Victor's office, her mind a whirlwind of hurt and confusion, she saw them. Maxwell Finch and the Westridge executives weren't fuming or defensive. They were practically preening in the hallway, their smiles smug, triumphant. An icy dread coiled in Clara's stomach. This wasn't a negotiation, it felt like a victory lap. Her gut screamed that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then, a memory sparked the small, discreet door to the audio monitoring room, a relic from a past security upgrade. Driven by a surge of defiant suspicion, Clara slipped inside, her heart pounding with a new, fierce determination. The monitoring room was cold, sterile, a stark contrast to the emotional inferno raging inside Clara. She quickly located the feed for the main conference room. Maxwell Finch's voice boomed, thick with self-satisfaction. "And thanks to our inside source, Richard Sterling, we know exactly how to play this. Victor, your board is already shaky on your leadership. And then there's the Isabel Flores situation. We have recordings, Mr. Thorne. Recordings of Sterling himself, detailing how you handled it, relocated her, paid her off, swept everything under the rug." Clara gasped. A choked sound caught in her throat. Richard Sterling. Richard was the inside source. And then, the chilling sound of Richard's own voice on a playback, clearer than any whisper she'd overheard. "Isabel Flores. Yes, we handled it. Relocated her. Paid her off." Shock, horror, and a searing wave of vindication washed over Clara. Victor hadn't betrayed anyone. He had been blackmailed. Richard Sterling was the real snake in the grass. Her hands flew across the console, saving the incriminating audio to a USB drive. Clara burst from the monitoring room, a singular purpose driving her. She found Leo Kim at his desk, preparing to leave. "Leo, we have a problem, a huge problem, and Victor is in deep trouble." She practically shoved the USB drive into his hand, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Richard Sterling, he's been feeding information to Westridge. He's blackmailing Victor, using Isabel Flores as leverage. I heard it. Everything." Leo's eyes widened, his initial skepticism giving way to a look of dawning horror as Clara played a snippet of the recording. This is a full-blown corporate espionage. We need an emergency board meeting, now." Leo's voice was firm, his loyalties clear. "I'll make the calls, you get to Victor." Clara knew the audio recording was damning, but it wasn't enough to fully explain the Isabel Flores situation. The board would demand more. She needed to clear Victor's name completely. Leaving Leo to arrange the emergency meeting, Clara raced to her desk. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing Meridian's internal archives. She delved into old HR records, financial reports, anything that might shed light on Isabel Flores and the events surrounding her departure. Her search was a frantic dance through fragmented reports and cryptic communications. There were hints of past irregularities in the finance department, subtle red flags that had been dismissed or buried. Richard Sterling's name appeared repeatedly in those old files, often in the context of resolving minor discrepancies. Clara felt a growing chill, piecing together a timeline of manipulation. She was close. She could feel it. Then, tucked away in a digital folder labeled Sensitive Personnel Files Archived, Clara found it. A detailed, impassioned report from Isabel Flores herself. It outlined Richard Sterling's systematic financial irregularities, his subtle siphoning of funds. Isabel had uncovered it all, years ago. The documents confirmed that Victor hadn't discarded her. He had protected her. He'd helped her relocate, ensuring her safety from Richard's retaliation, nearly sacrificing his own career in the process. The payoff Eleanor had mentioned wasn't hush money for a relationship. It was a generous severance package to help Isabel start anew. Tears streamed down Clara's face, a torrent of relief and profound regret. Isabel's letter concluded with a heartfelt thanks to Victor for his integrity and a stark warning about Richard. Clara felt a wave of shame for ever doubting him, and a fierce, protective love surged through her. Victor was a hero, not a villain. She owed him everything. She had to get to him now. Clara burst into the conference room, where Victor was locked in a tense standoff with Maxwell Finch and the Westridge legal team. Their faces were a mixture of surprise and annoyance at her interruption. "Mr. Thorne," Clara announced, her voice clear and strong despite her pounding heart. "An emergency board meeting has been called. Immediately. Your presence, and Mr. Sterling's, is required." She met Victor's eyes, a subtle flicker of understanding passing between them. He saw the fire in her gaze, the USB drive clutched in her hand. He knew. Victor's jaw tightened. "You heard the lady, Mr. Finch. We'll have to continue this discussion later." His tone was dismissive, his focus now entirely on Clara. Maxwell Finch spluttered, outraged, but Victor simply turned and strode out, Clara falling in step beside him. In the bustling hallway, Clara spoke in a rapid-fire whisper, the words tumbling out. "Richard, he's been feeding Westridge information. He's blackmailing you, Alexander. And Isabel Flores wasn't a victim of your ambition. She was a whistleblower, and you protected her. Richard was the one behind the irregularities." Victor stopped, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, his eyes filled with a potent mix of relief and profound regret. "Clara, I am so sorry, for everything. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't risk revealing Isabel's safety. I was falling for you, and I didn't want to drag you into this." Clara leaned into his touch for a fleeting moment. "I know, and I'm sorry I doubted you, but we have to go, now. The board is waiting. Richard needs to be exposed." Their eyes locked, a silent promise passing between them. Clara and Victor entered the boardroom together, a united front. Leo Kim was already there, looking grim. Richard Sterling, smirking confidently, was taken aback by Clara's presence. Eleanor Vance watched, her expression unreadable. "Gentlemen, Ms. Davies has some information to share," Victor stated, his voice ringing with authority. Clara stepped forward, her hands steady as she inserted the USB drive. "I believe this audio recording, taken this morning, speaks for itself." The recording played, Maxwell Finch's voice accusing Victor, then Richard Sterling's own confession of handling Isabel. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard's face went ashen, then scarlet with fury. "This is slander, a fabrication." But Clara wasn't finished. "And this," she continued, presenting Isabel Flores's detailed report and letter, "explains the true story of Isabel Flores and Mr. Sterling's extensive history of financial impropriety." The board members stared, stunned. Victor stepped forward, his voice cold and resolute. "Richard Sterling, you are terminated, effective immediately. As for Ms. Davies, given her extraordinary integrity and investigative prowess, I am pleased to announce her new appointment as Director of Strategic Integrity, reporting directly to the board." Richard was escorted out, his desperate pleas echoing in the silent room. Clara met Victor's gaze, a shared triumph in their eyes. Weeks later, Clara thrived in her new role as Director of Strategic Integrity. Her office was no longer a cubicle, but a spacious room with a view, a testament to her hard-won position. She and Victor, now Alexander to her, often found themselves working late, the lines between their professional collaboration and burgeoning personal connection blurring beautifully. They discussed their future, acknowledging the inevitable whispers and gossip from the board, but choosing to face it head-on. 6 months later, Clara had completed her business degree, her insights now sought after by the entire board. Her relationship with Alexander was public, strong, and unwavering. Isabel Flores, encouraged by Clara's victory, had returned to testify against Richard Sterling, whose downfall was complete and irreversible. Clara stood on the penthouse balcony of Alexander's apartment, the city lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds. She traced the worn cover of her diary, now safely back in her possession. A lost diary, a whisper of love, and a corporate conspiracy. It had all led her here, to a life she'd never dared to dream of, filled with purpose, truth, and a love as profound as the city stretching out before her. This wasn't just a new chapter, It was an entirely new story,